Imagine that we are gathered on a dark night, under the stars that light up the sky, amid the crackle of the fire to tell a story. Today I will take you to the land where history's greatest thinkers and warriors lived, where myths and legends were born. Ancient Greece. This world was not just stone walls and ancient temples. Every corner was a reflection of man's creative power and passions. Here gods and men shared the same stage. Heroes wrote epics, philosophers tried to unravel the secrets of the universe. But this glorious civilization was not born in an instant. It all started with the first civilizations, shaped by the waves of the Aegean. Now we will step into the world of the Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations that wrote the first lines of this story. Together we will discover how this land was shaped, how man rose up and carved a new destiny for himself. But first, consider this question. How does the beginning of a civilization determine its future? My dear friends, now I will pull back the curtain of time and take you back thousands of years. In those days, the shores of the Aegean Sea were far from the tranquil scene they are today. In these waters, the songs of sailors mingled with the wind, and ideas traveled from shore to shore as much as the goods carried by ships. It was this sea that became the cradle of a civilization, the birthplace of the Minoan Clemen in English college. Their story is not only the story of ancient Greece, but of one of the oldest roots of humanity. It all started on the island of Crete. Today I will tell you about the Minoan civilization. Oh, what a glorious place Crete was, in the middle of the blue waters of the Aegean. It was a beauty that even the gods would envy. Here, according to legends, rose a kingdom ruled by Minos, the son of Zeus. But this kingdom was not just legends. The palace's frescoed walls and finely crafted pottery, unearthed by archaeologists, show that the Minoans were an advanced civilization. The palace of Knossos was the heart of this civilization. The palace was not only a center of administration, but also a place where art, trade, and religious rituals met. Its labyrinthine architecture even inspired the legend of the Minotauros. Such a home, but my dear friends, the Minoans were not just an island people. They were the merchants of the Aegean. Their ships traveled far and wide, carrying olive oil, wine, and finely crafted ceramics across the Mediterranean. This trade carried not only goods, but also ideas and cultures. It was through this exchange that the Minoan civilization grew, flourished, and became one of the most powerful in the Aegean. But nothing could last forever. The story of the Minoans ended one day. A volcanic eruption devastated the island of Thera, and then giant waves crashed over Crete. The power of the Minoans weakened, and a new player appeared on the scene: the Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans were a warlike people from the Greek mainland. They took the Minoan grace and blended it with their own toughness. The centers of Mycenaean civilization were fortresses built on high hills. The most famous of these fortresses was the Mycenaean fortress that inspired Homer's epics. When you stepped through the Lion Gate, you could immediately feel the power and splendor of this people. The Mycenaeans were not only warriors, but also merchants and craftsmen. However, their world did not last forever. Centuries of internal conflicts, external threats, and finally the Dark Age buried the Mycenaean civilization in the pages of history. But my dear friends, even though the Minoans and Mycenaeans are gone, their legacy has not been erased. These two civilizations laid the foundations of ancient Greece: art, commerce, writing, and even mythology. They were all the work of these ancient peoples. Now, I would like to ask you, if the first civilizations that rose from these lands were like this, what kind of glory could the ancient Greek world, which rose on their legacy, have had? Ah, my dear friends, let us now open a dark curtain of history. We are stepping into the Dark Ages, one of the most interesting periods of human history. It was a time when the magnificent palaces of the Mycenaean civilization fell silent, and wars and migrations disturbed the peace of the Aegean. So, what happened to the magnificent Mycenaeans that disappeared from the stage of history? Why did this land fall into silence and uncertainty? Here we will look for answers to these questions together. The fall of Mycenae did not happen all at once, nor was it caused by one cause alone. Historians see it as the result of wars, economic crises, and perhaps internal strife. But my friends, who knows? Perhaps the gods had turned their backs on the Mycenaeans. One by one, the fortresses fell, the people lost their security, and the trade routes were closed. After this devastation, the Aegean lands were shaken by a new wave from outside. Sea tribes. As these tribes swept across the Mediterranean like a hurricane, they dealt the final blow that would completely collapse the weakened Mycenaean structure. Oh, what storms raged on the shores of the Aegean in those days. People had to leave their homes. A great wave of migration began. These migrations carried with them not only people, but also cultures and traditions. The remnants of the Mycenaeans retreated to the mountains and valleys in smaller communities. They tried to build a new life in safe places. However, this new life was not as glorious as before. Writing was forgotten, trade declined, and art became silent. It was as if humanity had forgotten its own past. That is why this period is called the Dark Ages. But my dear friends, remember that every darkness gives birth to a light. This period of silence and destruction also heralded a rebirth. As people learned to survive in these harsh conditions, they were laying the foundations of a new era. Iron was the most important gift of this period. The bronze weapons of the Mycenaeans were replaced by iron, which was more durable and useful. Iron revolutionized not only the battlefield but also daily life. Everything from agricultural tools to construction equipment was reshaped with iron. This powerful metal gave people the power not only to survive, but to rebuild. Experts later heralded the discovery in chemistry as the greatest scientific advance made in the history of the world. The Dark Ages were also a time when new communities and traditions were born. The Dorians, who came to the Aegean with the migrations, became the new owners of this land. The culture they brought would form the cornerstones of ancient Greece. But what kind of world emerged after these migrations, changes, and new beginnings? How did the silence of the Aegean become the cradle of philosophy, art, and science? The answers to these questions, my dear friends, call us to the next story. Ah, my friends, we are embarking on another journey through the magical pages of history. We have left the dark ages of the past behind us, but now the lights of a new era are appearing on the horizon. This light, reflected in the blue waters of the Aegean, points to an era that will shape the history of mankind, the Archaic period. It is during this period that city-states, or polis, one of the most impressive building blocks of human history, begin to rise. Let us witness the birth of these city-states and their story across the seas. Along the Aegean coast, Among the hills and valleys, small settlements grew and developed over time. Each of them formed a world of its own. These worlds lived independent lives, even though they shared a common language and religion. These settlements were called polis, but my friends, a polis was not just a settlement. It was an identity, a belonging, a way of life. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and many others. Each one developed its own laws, gods, and customs. People were so attached to these city-states that being a citizen of a polis became the most important element of one's identity. So why were there so many policemen? Why did people choose to live in small communities instead of uniting? The answer, my dear friends, lies in the Aegean geography itself. Mountains and seas divided and fragmented this land. People built their own worlds in isolated valleys. But this isolation was not a weakness. On the contrary, it was a source of strength. Each polis developed a unity within itself and developed a self-sufficient system. Agriculture, trade, crafts. Everything sprouted in these small communities. But my friends, with every rise comes a challenge. As the police grew, the land became too small. Population grew, resources dwindled. At this point, one of the most remarkable movements of the Archaic period began: colonization. People set sail in search of new lands. They left the calm waters of the Aegean and sailed towards the vast shores of the Mediterranean and Black Sea. They reached the south of Italy, the fertile lands of Sicily, even as far as present-day Marseille. These new colonies were not only settlements, but also cultural and commercial centers that maintained links with the mother polis. A bridge was built between the old world and the new world. Colonization was not only an economic solution, but also a source of cultural enrichment. With new lands, they met different peoples, learned from them, and brought their own knowledge to them. These encounters shaped the character of the Archaic period. New ideas, art forms, trade routes, all become part of the legacy of this period. But my friends, this mobility brought by colonization also brought competition and conflict. A fierce struggle between the police over trade routes and territory began. But wait, what happened at the end of this story? How did these small city-states, competing against each other, lay the foundation for the glorious civilization of ancient Greece? And how were the seeds of philosophy, science, and art sown during this period? Here, my dear friends, in the next chapter, we will seek answers to these questions together. My friends, we are now embarking on a journey into one of history's most fascinating contrasts: the two great stars of the Aegean, Sparta and Athens. These two city-states played an important role in shaping not only ancient Greece, but the whole of human history. But as close as they were, their ways of life and values were very different. Two different worlds together. Sparta, the very name of Sparta instills a sense of discipline and courage, doesn't it? Hidden among the mountains, this city was as strong and unshakable as a fortress. But my friends, this strength did not come overnight. Sparta reinvented itself through a transformation that took centuries. It all began in the 8th century BC, when the Spartans of the Lachaemon Valley subjugated their neighbors, the Messenians. This victory was both a reward and a burden for the Spartans. For the Messenians became helots, slaves who kept the Spartan economy afloat. However, these helots were so numerous and brave that they could start an uprising at any moment to take back their freedom. It was this danger that forced Sparta to establish one of the strictest military orders in history.
The Spartans, life was a battlefield. Even a newborn baby was part of this order. The healthy ones survived, the weak ones were left to their fate. At the age of 7, children were taken from their families and put into a harsh education system called agoge. Here they were taught courage, endurance, and obedience. Every Spartan was raised to protect not only his own life, but the safety of the whole community. Even women were part of this order. They were encouraged to be strong and healthy, to give birth to healthy warriors. Ah, my friends, this organization of Sparta was as frightening as it was admirable.
What about Athens? In contrast to the harshness and military ardor of Sparta, Athens was opening the doors to another world. This was a world of art, philosophy, and freedom. However, it was not easy for Athens to achieve this glorious democracy. In the 7th century BC, Athens was ruled by rich aristocrats. A large part of the population was enslaved because they could not pay their debts. This injustice was causing great unrest in the society. At this point, a wise man named Solon appeared on the stage of history. Solon reformed the laws, canceled the debts of the people, and abolished slavery. But my friends, Solon's reforms were a beginning, not a solution. The great transformation took place under the leadership of a leader called Cleisthenes. In the late 6th century BC, Cleisthenes laid the foundations of democracy in Athens. A popular assembly and popular courts were established, giving citizens the right to participate in decision-making processes. Athens became a symbol of freedom and equality. However, this democracy was only valid for Athenian male citizens. Women, slaves, and foreigners were deprived of these rights. Nevertheless, this step by Athens was a guiding light in human history. Ah, my friends, Sparta and Athens. Two different worlds, two different ideals. One a symbol of discipline and courage, the other the light of freedom and knowledge. But these two worlds would one day collide. And how did this encounter turn out? Did the two different ways of life manage to outmaneuver each other? We will look for answers to these questions together in the next chapter. My dear friends, I will now take you back to one of the most dramatic periods in history. It was a struggle for freedom, a time when not only territory was defended but also ideas and ways of life. Rising from the blue waters of the Aegean, the Greek city-states faced a great threat from the east, the Persian Empire. The Persians had dominated all of Asia with their mighty armies, and now they had set their sights on Greek soil. But this story is not just a tale of war. It is also an epic of courage, sacrifice, and a test of the limits of the human spirit. Let's open the pages of this epic together. It all started when King Darius of Persia sent envoys to subjugate the Greek city-states. The Persians demanded land and water from the Greeks, a symbol of submission. However, freedom-loving cities like Athens and Sparta refused. In fact, the Athenians and Spartans openly declared their defiance by killing Persian envoys. This was the spark of the Greek-Persian Wars. The Persians did not leave this challenge unanswered, and in 490 BC they landed on the Aegean coast with a huge army. Their goal was to raze Athens to the ground, the plain of Marathon. Ah, my friends, every time this name is mentioned, a wave of excitement rises in me. The Persians landed on the coast of Marathon with a huge army. The Athenians were far fewer in number, but they had the spirit to fight for freedom. Led by General Miltiades, the Athenians stood up to the Persians. When the battle began, the Athenians' courage and strategy outnumbered the Persians. The Athenians defeated the Persian army, and this victory was the first major step in the struggle for freedom in the Greek world. According to legend, a messenger ran from Marathon to Athens to announce this victory to the Athenians, and after shouting, "We won," he collapsed and died. Today, this heroic run has inspired the marathon races of the modern Olympics. But my friends, this victory did not end the Persian threat. After Darius's death, his son Xerxes prepared a huge army and navy to conquer Greece once and for all. By 480 BC, the Persians were again advancing on Greek territory. This time, the Greek city-states had to put aside their conflicts with each other and unite. It was at this point that one of the most famous battles in history took place. Thermopylae, the Pass of Thermopylae. Ah, my dear friends, words are inadequate to describe what happened here. King Leonidas of Sparta and his 300 brave soldiers stood like a wall in a narrow pass to stop the advance of the Persian army. The Persians were vastly outnumbered, but the courage and discipline of the Spartans astounded them. This resistance lasted for days, buying time for the Greek world, but unfortunately, guided by a traitor, the Persians broke through the pass through the mountains and surrounded the Spartans. Leonidas and his soldiers fought to their last breath and went down in history as a symbol of resistance to death. In 10 centuries, Athens kept its history. The Persians had captured and burned Athens, but the Greeks still had not given up. There was to be a great struggle at sea too. In the Strait of Salamis, the Greek fleet, led by Themistocles, trapped the Persians' massive fleet. Persian ships, limited in their mobility in the narrow waters, were sunk one by Greek triremes. This victory marked the beginning of the Persian withdrawal from Greek territory. The victory of Salamis was a victory of Greek unity and courage. My friends, the Greco-Persian Wars were not just a series of battles. It was a struggle for freedom, for the independence of the individual, of society, and of thought. But what was the state of the Greek world after these wars? Did these victories bring the Greek city-states closer together, or did they sow the seeds of new conflicts? In the next chapter, we will explore the answers to these questions together. Ah, my dear friends, there is a time in the dusty pages of history when the creative spirit and intellectual power of mankind reach its peak. This is the golden age of Athens, shining brightly on the hills of the Acropolis in the heart of the Greek world. And it was the city's leader, Pericles, who shaped this age. Let's explore this glorious period, this unique rise, step by step. After the Persian Wars, Athens was at the height of its power. The victory at Salamis was a demonstration of Greek unity, but Athens, as the center of unity, had gained more power than any other city-state. This power was not only a military superiority, it was also a harbinger of leadership in the fields of thought, art, and politics. Pericles appeared on the scene in this very period, a gifted statesman, a decisive leader, and a visionary. Pericles wanted to elevate Athens, not only as a military power, but also as a center of culture and democracy. Under his leadership, Athens became a star, admired by the entire Greek world. One of Pericles' first and greatest achievements was to strengthen Athenian democracy. Democracy at that time was practiced in a narrower framework, not as broadly as it is today. Nevertheless, Pericles introduced reforms that encouraged ordinary citizens to participate in politics. The popular assembly became a space where every citizen could express his or her opinion. To increase citizens' loyalty to the state, Pericles ensured that they were paid a salary while serving in the assembly. This was one of the cornerstones of a system in which everyone, rich and poor alike, could participate in decision-making. It was this understanding of democracy, my dear friends, which distinguished Athens from other city-states, that would become a legacy that would influence the whole world in the future. But Pericles' vision was not limited to politics. The magnificent Parthenon temple, towering over the Acropolis, was one of the greatest monuments of his time. This temple was not only a place of worship, but also a monument to the wealth, power, and aesthetic sense of Athens. The Parthenon's columns soared as if carrying the pride of Athens into the sky, while the statue of Athena inside the temple was admired for centuries as the city's protector. The construction of this colossal structure was a perfect combination of architecture, engineering, and art. Great artists such as Phidias worked under the guidance of their muses to create it. The Parthenon became the greatest symbol that realized Pericles' dream of making Athens immortal. But my friends, this golden age cannot be measured only by buildings or political systems. It was a reflection of the human mind and spirit. Sophists and philosophers freely discussed their ideas in the squares of Athens, reflecting on human nature, the structure of the universe, and morality. Thinkers such as Socrates encouraged people to question and learn, and the streets of Athens reeked of knowledge, and stemmed the devastation that followed the death of Socrates. The theater also experienced a golden age during this period. Tragedies and comedies were not only entertainment, but also called the public to think and go to an emotional depth. Masters such as Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides left works that influenced not only the period, but also the entire history of humanity. Of course, this rise also brought Athens face to face with many enemies. The Spartans and other Greek city-states began to grow uncomfortable with Athens' growing power. This discontent would sow the seeds of a devastating conflict that would later become known as the Peloponnesian Wars. But Pericles ensured that Athens stood firm in the face of these pressures. Under his leadership, Athens tried to maintain its military and political power while rising culturally. And my friends, this great vision of Pericles was limited to his lifetime. After his death, Athens was plagued by internal and external pressures. And yet, his legacy was a light not only for Athens, but for the whole world. So what challenges did Athens face after Pericles' death? How did the conflicts and destruction that followed the Golden Age affect the Greek world? We will look for answers to these questions together in the next chapter. My dear friends, sometimes there are periods on the great stage of history that shake the human spirit, with the fall that follows the rise, the tragedy that follows the triumph. The Peloponnesian War is just such a story. The two great powers of the Greek world, Athens and Sparta, faced each other in a long-lasting conflict that turned into an epic of destruction, with both winners and losers. Let us dive deep into that period to understand the causes, development, and consequences of this war. The Golden Age of Athens was a peak not only in art, philosophy, and democracy, but also in the centralization of power. The Delian League was initially established as a defensive alliance against the Persian threat. In time, however, this union turned into an empire under the leadership of Athens. Athens strengthened its navy with the tribute it collected from other city-states, built magnificent monuments such as the Parthenon, and achieved undisputed supremacy as a maritime power in the Aegean Sea. This, however, displeased Sparta, especially famous for its land power, and the Peloponnesian League that rallied around it. The balance of power in the Greek world was out of balance, and this imbalance eventually led to an inevitable conflict. The war broke out in 431 BC. At first, the strategies of the two sides were quite different. While Sparta invaded Athenian territory with its powerful land army, Athens was on the defensive, thanks to its long walls and strong navy. Pericles' clever plan was to draw the Athenians inside the city walls and wear the Spartans down with a prolonged siege. But, my friends, war is not won by the power of arms alone. Throughout history, nature has been man's greatest ally or enemy. The plague that broke out in Athens decimated the city's population. This terrible disease claimed the lives of not only thousands of people, but also the great leader of Athens, Pericles. Athens had lost its leader, and its people were left in fear and despair. In the following years of the war, both sides engaged in an endless struggle of attrition. Spartans began to challenge Athens at sea by building a navy with the financial support they received from Persia. Athens, on the other hand, tried to turn the war in its favor with risky moves such as the Sicilian campaign. However, my dear friends, such big gambles sometimes lead to big losses. The fiasco in Sicily seriously weakened Athens' power. Its fleet was destroyed, its soldiers captured, and the Athenian people demoralized. This defeat completely changed the course of the war. In the end, the Athenians finally decided to bow to the decisive truth. It was Troy's turn. The Greeks primed Lucus and determined to be free to leave. Sparta finally forced Athens to surrender in 404 BC. The tall walls of Athens were destroyed, its navy disbanded, and the city that had once been the shining star of the Greek world was now a shadow. But, my friends, this victory came at a heavy price. Sparta, too, was exhausted at the end of this long war. The Greek world never recovered its former unity and strength after this war. Internal conflicts, weakening city-states, and external threats marked the end of the golden age of Greek civilization. Ah, my dear friends, the Peloponnesian Wars show us once again how power and ambition can lead to destruction. But how was the Greek world transformed in the aftermath of these wars? With the rise of Alexander the Great, could these scattered city-states come together again? We will look for answers to these questions together in the next chapter. Ah, my dear friends, there are certain periods in the course of history when the human mind expands like a window to the sky, and new thoughts and insights begin to shine forth. This golden age of ancient Greece echoed not only with the rise of cities and wars, but also with the voices of thinkers pushing the limits of the human mind. It was a time of sophists, philosophers, and the first sparks of science. Let's step into the world of these great minds together. It all started with the courage to question. Teachers, known in the Greek world at the time as sophists, believed in the power of knowledge and rhetoric. They tried to shed light on the individual's thoughts, values, and decisions, arguing that man is the measure of all things. The The sophists were especially bold in their debates on morality, politics, and society, arguing that knowledge was relative, not absolute. But these ideas seemed revolutionary to some and dangerous to others. Because, my dear friends, it always takes courage to question the traditional values of a society. Nor was Qin Shi living a free person in pre-darkness. As this world of thought of the sophists echoed through the stone streets of Athens, another voice rose, Socrates' voice. Ah, Socrates, this colossal figure of philosophy unfortunately lived no works, but his ideas have lived on for generations, thanks to the writings of his students. Unlike the sophists, Socrates believed that absolute truths existed, but the way to reach these truths was to ask the right questions, not to give answers. His famous method of questioning forced people to think and made them realize their own ignorance. The only thing I know is that I know nothing, he said, showing how wise he really was. But, dear friends, as always, asking bold questions is not always welcome. Socrates was put on trial for poisoning young people and disrespecting the gods, and tragically died by drinking hemlock poison, but rather the beginning. Plato, Socrates' student, inherited his teacher's legacy and carried it forward. Plato was not only a philosopher but also a great writer. In his work, The State, he imagined what an ideal society should be like. According to him, a society should be ruled by philosopher kings, and justice and wisdom should be prioritized above all else. Plato's famous allegory of the cave is a guide to understanding the nature of truth and knowledge. Humans are chained in a cave and condemned to see only shadows. Only the philosopher can break these chains and reach the outside world, the truth. Ah, these profound ideas of Plato shaped not only his own time, but the world of thought for centuries to come. Plato's student Aristotle took his teacher's ideas one step further. Aristotle laid the foundations of science as he sought to understand nature, man, and the universe. His work was pioneering in many fields such as logic, biology, physics, ethics, and politics. Aristotle argued that everything has a purpose. He called this purposeness. According to him, everything in the universe develops in accordance with its own nature and reaches a conclusion. This idea sowed the first seeds of the scientific method in modern science. Aristotle's influence was so great that his works were used as primary sources in the Islamic world and Europe throughout the Middle Ages. Ah, my dear friends, the great journey of thought of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle has illuminated the path not only of philosophy, but also of humanity. They courageously asked questions, shared their thoughts, and tirelessly pursued the truth. But did the influence of these great ideas remain only in the Greek world? Or did they spread throughout the Roman Empire and beyond? We will discover the answer to this question together in the next chapter. Ah, my dear friends, today I'm going to talk to you about those turbulent times when fate brought them together under one roof, starting with the glorious city-states of the Greek world. Let's imagine the Greek city-states Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and others had been competing with each other for centuries. Each shone with its own uniqueness, its own form of government, and its own pride. But behind all this splendor lay the seeds of discord and conflict. Just as the Greek lands were emerging from the ashes of the Peloponnesian Wars, a new storm was brewing. This storm was named after a man who had emerged from a wild and often despised region in the north, Philip II, King of Macedonia. Oh, Philip, what a clever, ambitious leader he was. Macedonia was a land that had not been taken seriously by the Greeks until then. In their eyes, the Macedonians were a rude and uncivilized people, far removed from civilized Greek culture. But Philip was a genius who would change this perception forever. His vision was not only to strengthen Macedonia, but to unite the entire Greek world under one banner. At the time of his accession, Macedonia was in turmoil. Enemies roamed its borders and internal unrest rocked its throne. But Philip was able to turn these difficulties to his advantage. First, he reshaped the Macedonian army. The famous Macedonian phalanx, a battle tactic in which soldiers with long spears move in tight formation, was the product of his brilliance. Philip was not only a soldier but also a diplomat. With power and persuasion, he skillfully exploited the conflicts of the Greek city-states. At this time, the Greek world was still preoccupied with internal strife. They had weakened and worn each other down. Philip first eliminated threats from the north, then expanded Macedonia's territory by conquering regions such as Thessaly and Thrace. Each victory increased his power and prestige, but his real plan was to unite all the Greek city-states under his leadership. You can't help but ask how he did it, can you? With guile, cleverness, and, when necessary, the sharpness of the sword. Philip devised a grand strategy to defeat powerful city-states like Athens and Thebai. When the Greek city-states turned against him at the Battle of Chaeronea, Philip and his son Alexander, a young but impressive commander, were ready to make history. Chaeronea. That was the day the Greeks breathed their last breath of independence. Philip's army triumphed, thanks to his genius combined with the power of the phalanx. The pride of the Greek city-states was broken, and their destiny changed. When Philip united the Greek world, he also knew that this unification would not end in a war. He wanted to lead them against a common enemy, the vast Persian Empire to the east. But before Philip could realize this plan, the cruel hand of fate touched him. An assassination ended Philip's life. His death was both an end and a beginning, because the throne he left behind was inherited by his son Alexander, Alexander the Great, who would conquer the world. My dear friends, Philip's story shows us that leadership is not won by strength alone, but by intelligence and vision. But I cannot help but ask you, can a king's vision live on after his death? How did Philip's dreams take shape in the hands of his son? How did Alexander inherit his father's legacy and change the course of history? Here, in the next chapter, we will step into this great story. My dear friends, there are some names in the history of the world that are identified not only with one period, but with the entire history of mankind. Today I'm going to tell you about one such name, Alexander the Great, a legendary leader, a conqueror, a culture bearer. Alexander's story is etched in the minds of mankind, not only for the battles he won, but also for the lasting legacy he built. But to understand this great story, we need to look closely at the vision that shaped his youth and the passion that guided his life. Alexander was born the son of King Philip II of Macedonia, but he was not destined to be an ordinary king. Even at a young age, this boy, whose eyes looked beyond the horizon, studied under the guidance of a genius like Aristotle. Aristotle. He not only taught him philosophy and science, he also gave him a worldview, a purpose. Alexander knew Homer's epics by heart and dreamed of becoming an immortal hero like Achilles. The fire that burned in his heart became a real flame with the death of his father. Taking the throne when he was only 20 years old, Alexander proved to be a leader worthy of the Macedonian throne, with his courage and intelligence despite his young age. But my dear friends, Alexander's eyes were set far beyond Macedonia. He set out to fulfill his father's dream, to conquer the Persian Empire. This vast empire was the West's greatest enemy, and Alexander was confident he could bring it to its knees. In 334, when he met the Persian army at the Granicus River, his victory was just the beginning. His victories were linked together like a chain. Issos, Gaugamela. In each battle, the Persian armies disintegrated and their cities surrendered. Alexander was not just a conqueror. He was the epitome of strategy, military genius, and leadership. The army that moved with him was not a nation, but a community, pursuing a dream. When he entered the heart of the Persian Empire, he conquered everything from Babylon to Persepolis. But Alexander's conquests were not only with the sword, they were also with culture. Everywhere he went, he carried Greek culture, language, art, architecture, and philosophy. He founded new cities, the most famous of which was Alexandria, which bears his name. These cities were a reflection of the Greek world, but also blended with the rich cultures of the conquered lands. This was the beginning of the Hellenistic period. The Hellenistic period. The legacy Alexander left behind was not just about military victories. Greek culture blossomed in the lands he conquered. Greek language, science, art, and philosophy spread from the Mediterranean to India. But this cultural diffusion was not only one-sided. The rich cultural heritage of the East mingled with the Greek world, resulting in an unprecedented synthesis. Scientists gathered in the cities founded by Alexander to make new discoveries. Artists and philosophers produced works influenced by different cultures. The Hellenistic period was one of the most productive intellectual periods in human history. But my friends, Alexander's story ends with the fall of a hero. He died of illness at the age of 32, at the peak of his life. With his death, his empire crumbled, but his legacy lives on. Even today, when we mention Alexander's name, we remember his vision without borders, his passion for uniting people, and his power to blend cultures. So, my friends, how did Alexander's world change with his young death? How did this Hellenistic legacy continue to flourish as his empire crumbled? In the next chapter, we will explore the answers to these big questions together. My dear friends, we are embarking on a journey through the mists of time. As we step into the world of ancient Greece, I will introduce you not only to the villages, cities, and palaces where people lived, but also to a universe where gods ruled. This is a universe where a story is hidden in every stone, and a legend shines in every star. And these stories were not just fairy tales that circulated by word of mouth. They were sacred truths that shaped daily life and determined human destiny. For the ancient Greeks, the world was no ordinary place. Every tree had a spirit, every stream had a god. From the summits of the mountains to the depths of the seas, everything depended on the will of the gods. Zeus's thunderbolts exploded in the skies, while Poseidon's trident rippled the seas. And underground, on the dark throne of Hades, the souls of the dead sought peace. For humans, these gods were not just beings to be worshipped, but an integral part of life. A farmer working in the fields would pray to Demeter, the goddess of fertility. A sailor would make offerings to protect himself from the wrath of Poseidon. And a warrior would seek Athena's wisdom before going to battle. But these gods, my friends, were not distant and inaccessible. like the gods of the other world. The Greek gods shared human passions, weaknesses, and desires. Who has not heard of the adventures of Zeus? He was the king of the sky, but also a mischievous lover. Hera's jealousy, Aphrodite's charm, Ares' anger. The gods rejoiced, grieved, fell in love, and became angry, just like humans. But their power was limitless, and their every mistake echoed in the human world. Harmonious, stealing fire for humans, opening Pandora's box. These stories taught lessons about how people should live their lives, while at the same time reminding us that fate was inevitable. And these mythological stories, my dear friends, did not only talk about gods. Heroes were also an important part of this world. What Greek mythology would be complete without mentioning the strength of Heracles, the intelligence of Odysseus, the courage of Perseus? These heroes overcame difficult tasks with the permission of the gods, or sometimes with their anger. Each story told of man's struggle with nature, with the gods, and even with his own weaknesses. Oh, my dear friends, think about it. Can anything explain what it means to be human better than these stories? The ancient Greeks did not see mythology as just stories. It was their religion. Their lives were full of worship of the gods, festivals, games, and rituals. Even the Olympic Games were originally a tribute to Zeus, while the theater games were an offering to Dionysus. Each temple was built as the home of a god, and these sacred places were not only places of worship, but also centers of social life. People communicated with the gods here and consulted oracles to learn their fate. You may have heard of the Temple of Apollo in Delphi. The oracle was the voice of the god telling the future, and people believed without a doubt that those words were true. So people have been rationalizing the words of the gods until the very end of time. Now think about it, dear friends, how rich and fascinating this mythological world is, isn't it? But a question comes to mind. Were these gods and their stories merely a figment of the imagination of the ancient Greeks? Or did they reflect some other truth hidden deep in human history? This is the question we will pursue in the next chapter. In the footsteps of gods and heroes, we will discover together that magical world where reality and imagination blend together. Ah, my dear friends, once upon a time, in a world where gods watched over men from the heavens, where every stone and tree was sacred, there was an extraordinary tradition celebrating the ascension of the human spirit. Today we call it the ancient Olympic Games. But back then, these games were not only an event where athletes competed, but also a feast dedicated to the gods, a heartbeat of the Greek people beating in a common rhythm. Let us now take a journey to that sacred land, to the region of Elis and Olympia. This story begins in ancient times. It is said that the games were started in honor of Zeus. Olympia was a place where not only athletes but also gods made their presence felt. A gigantic statue of Zeus towered at the heart of this sacred space. The majesty of the statue made every athlete who participated in the competitions think the same thing. The race was not only against other humans, but also an attempt to be worthy of the gods. Imagine for a moment we are transported back in time. People gathered to show their loyalty to Zeus, each of them wanting to be a hero in the eyes of the gods. It was a test not only of muscular strength, but also of the greatness of the spirit. The games were held every 4 years, during which time a holy peace was proclaimed throughout the Greek world. Yes, my dear friends, enmities were forgotten, weapons were laid down. The din of war gave way to the excitement of the stadium. Athletes came from all over the Greek city-states, And when they stepped into the sanctuary of Olympia, they were not rivals, but bearers of the same tradition. Sports were an art that glorified the endurance and strength of the human body. Disciplines such as running races, discus throwing, wrestling, and pentathlon were like a presentation of the body's loyalty to the gods. But this was not just a sporting competition, my dear friends. The Olympics was also a stage where Greek culture, art, and faith met. Between competitions, poets recited their poems, sculptors displayed their works, philosophers shared their teachings. The victorious athletes received only a crown of olive branches, but the meaning that flowed from it was priceless. Because it was a gift from the gods, a victory was the pride not only of the individual, but of the entire city that the winner represented. A victorious athlete would be welcomed by his own people almost as a god. When he passed through the city gates, he was honored like a hero and felt as if he had achieved immortality. And my dear friends, during these games, people celebrated not only physical strength, but also morality and discipline. Athletes swore to be worthy of the gods. The spiritual dimension of the games was so great that everyone who participated in the competitions somehow felt as if they were being tested before the gods. But the gods rewarded not only the victors, but also those who competed honestly. This ethos made games a spiritual experience, not just a physical challenge. So, my dear friends, how do you think these sacred races at Olympia contributed to the unification of the Greek world? And did the winners of that olive branch crown represent victory alone, or were they bearers of a greater ideal? In the next episode, we will pursue these questions and discover together how the legacy of the Olympics lives on even today. Rest now and imagine the magic of these legendary games. But Odysseus didn't only face the wrath of the gods, he also had to deal with magic and temptation. One day, they reached the island of the beautiful and enchanting Circe, a sorceress who turned men into pigs. With a glance, a touch, it was all it took for her to transform them, but with help from the god Hermes, Odysseus overcame Circe's spell, resisted her charms, and saved his men. Still, they stayed with her for a whole year, healing from their wounds, though the time only took them further away from home. After leaving Circe, they had to navigate the dark waters of the sea, where terrifying sirens awaited them. With their songs, the sirens could drive any sailor mad. To get through, Odysseus had his men block their ears with beeswax, but he, determined to hear their haunting melodies, had himself bound tightly to the mast of his ship. Despite his longing to follow the siren's call, he was kept safe, unable to escape his bonds, and thus avoided their deadly spell. But Poseidon wasn't done with Odysseus yet. Next, the hero had to face the most dangerous creatures of the sea, Scylla and Charybdis. On one side, the six-headed monster Scylla, and on the other, the deadly whirlpool Charybdis. Navigating between these two threats was a fight for survival. Odysseus skillfully steered his ship, but he still had to sacrifice some men to Scylla's jaws. Yet they managed to escape the treacherous passage. But the journey didn't end there. Years passed, and each step Odysseus took toward Ithaca brought him face to face with new challenges. He lost all his men and was left alone, adrift on a raft. Some gods, like Zeus, Aphrodite, and Athena, helped him, while others tried to mislead him. But no matter what, Odysseus's hope to return home never faded. Finally, the gods took pity on him and slowly guided him toward Ithaca. The winds, the waves, and the will of the gods brought him closer and closer to home. So, my friends, what awaited Odysseus when he finally reached Ithaca after all these years? What had become of his throne, his home, and his loved ones in his absence? In the next chapter, we'll uncover the answers to these questions. Let's see if the peaceful sight awaiting him in Ithaca will be the kind of rest that a weary warrior dreams of. My dear friends, the stories of the Greek gods, yes, they began on Mount Olympus. It was here that the gods were born, loved, fought, and built their world. But as time passed, the beliefs in the hearts of men began to change. And it was right here that the Olympian gods, too, underwent a transformation with the flow of the ages. The shadows of the gods were reborn with the rise of the mighty Roman Empire, though under different names and faces. The Greek gods took on new identities in the Roman world, strengthened by new myths. Zeus became Jupiter, the mighty ruler of Rome. The famous goddess of beauty, Aphrodite, continued to be exalted under the name Venus. Athena, under the name Minerva, inherited the crown of wisdom. Poseidon, the unshakable god of the seas, was reborn as Neptune. But this change did not diminish the gods' identities or powers in the least. Even when dressed in Roman traditions, the Greek gods remained enchanting, powerful, and equally mysterious. With their new names, they continued to influence, scare, and give hope to the people. Temples were dedicated to them, poems were written in their honor, and statues in every corner of Rome continued to tell their immortal stories. And this was not just the case in Rome, dear friends. As time passed, the heroes and gods of Greek mythology resonated all across the world. The magic of these myths took root not only in temples, statues, and wall paintings, but also in the hearts of people. These stories spread like whispers from the lips of sages, passed down from generation to generation, reaching all the way to our modern world. People drew courage from them, learned about justice, and the concepts of heroism and loyalty found meaning through these tales. Even today, when we walk down the street, enter a museum, or read a poem, we can still feel the legacy of the Greek gods. Their names were given to stars and planets. The beauty of Aphrodite lived on in the glow of Venus. Zeus, the thunderous god of Olympus, continues to represent the kingship of the sky as Jupiter. Concepts like beauty, love, war, and peace, inspired by these ancient stories, have deeply permeated our culture. Now, my friends, why do you think these stories are still so powerful, so deep? Why have these tales, passed down through the centuries, never been forgotten? Perhaps deep inside, we've always yearned for a god, a hero, or a sage. Perhaps the human spirit found something of itself in these ancient stories. Maybe, just maybe, there's a little bit of Olympus, a little bit of Rome, inside all of us. Thus, dear friends, the legacy of Greek mythology was reborn with Rome, and this legacy became one of the cornerstones of Western culture. Literature, art, science, and even philosophy thrived, nourished, and enriched by the stories of these gods and heroes. These legends, transcending myths, became a part of our culture, an endless source in our minds. The myths lived on, and the gods and heroes turned into symbols within our thoughts. But, could there still be a spark of life on the peaks of Olympus? A tremendous galaxy, the world of magic. My name is Patrick O'Neill. My website is patrickoneil.com, and all of my social media handles are at SuKSimplim.